And welcome to another edition of Gridiron Nation on Game Plus. I'm Jim Mullin, and there is Gord Randall in his Surrey studios. Hey, Gord, Raymond, Messidor, Benefield. We've been talking about these three players all through the year. I think they're the guys on the podium for the Cornish Trophy this year. Raymond's season is done now. Did he do enough to be the top Canadian in the NCAA, in your opinion?
Yes, and I don't think it's particularly close at this point in time. And I mean, like a lot of football awards, there tends to be an offensive bias to this award, and I think we'll probably own that openly. But Antoine Raymond's had a fantastic season, and just because his team doesn't make it to a postseason game doesn't mean that we should sell that short. He finishes the regular season in the top 15 in rushing in almost every statistical category in the entire country. 1,241 yards rushing, 13 rushing touchdowns, adds another 200 and change receiving yards and a couple more touchdowns through the air. And importantly, did it through the teeth of the Big Ten schedule, right? We alluded to it a few weeks ago that he had a quiet stretch in the middle of the season, but he really poured it on down the stretch. And, Penn State's season has not gone the way they planned by any means, but this is still a team that was expected to have one of the best defenses in the country, and Raymond went off against them this past weekend, over 200 all-purpose yards. So he has really done impressive things in a big-time conference on a team that has often been at a talent disadvantage as well. And I think all of those things factor in and build his case even more so than just the surface level stats. So I think he's the clear front runner for the Cornish at this point in time.
But Akeem Messidor has broken through this year. He's had a fantastic year in Miami. And, when you look at Ty Benefield, this guy's oozing pro potential to play on Sundays, actually, coming out of Boise State, and has been the leader of that Boise State defense. What will it take for a defensive guy to break through in this conversation, either this year or in future years?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like we talk about this at some point every season, and ultimately the answer usually boils down to you're gonna have to have a season where you don't have an offensive standout, right? And that's what Raymond has become. I think coming into the season, I was fully prepared for it to be we finally break the streak and have a defensive player win the Cornish Award. But the reality is that Raymond blossomed and made himself a standout. And much like the Heisman Trophy south of the line, like unless you are also contributing on offense, it is nearly impossible to be a real strong contender for the trophy as a purely defensive player. So I think that's your answer is that if a defensive player, if a defensive player is winning national awards in the States, then yeah, I think for us, then that becomes the front runner. But the reality is that Messidor missed a couple games with injury. He's been very good when he's played, but he also isn't among the national leaders in major statistical categories, and has benefited from the high profile of being on a good team, as well as that. And so I think I just think that there's nits that you can pick in each of these cases. Ty Benefield was great for Boise State, but his team also underperformed their expectations this year, and he's playing in a mid-major conference. So, like I said, there's lots of things that you could argue, and the reality is, I think, unfortunately for defensive players, the standard, the threshold for what they need to win this award is going to be higher than an offensive guy by virtue of things that are kind of out of their control.
Stats are always important when it comes to awards. Let's shift gears a bit to the FCS playoffs. There were also some FCS season-ending games this past week. There have been Canadian performers that have been good but not outstanding so far at that level, but they ooze CFL potential in the future. Some seniors and some juniors, actually, especially at the receiver position. If they're given the right opportunity, these guys can perform, can't they?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen some contributions from guys like Dylan Jette at Alabama State, Anita Montagnac, Josh Fillion over at New Hampshire. And so I think that these can go either way, right? I think they've shown that there's enough juice there that they could potentially blossom as seniors and they could take the next step. And we could end up seeing them have like a Joey Corcoran level of production or a Keelan White level of production eventually. I think for each of those guys, I think all three of those guys are juniors. So it's kind of next year put up or shut up. But there's definitely some potential there. And there isn't necessarily an obvious guy as a receiver specifically for us to expect big production from at the FBS level. So it might draw some pretty significant attention from the likes of us next year. And frankly, I'm hoping that one or more of those guys manages to take the next step and become more of a standout at that level. Because like you alluded to, we've seen flashes, but we've seen plenty of examples of players for whom we never really got more than flashes. And so hopefully they can be the ones that are on the up and up and continue to get better and blossom in their senior year, rather than the ones that kind of get lost in the shuffle for one reason or another.
Well, and I'd like to see them stay with their programs instead of transfer. We've seen a number of Canadian receivers transfer over the last few years, and then they appear on milk cartons. So hopefully those three guys that you mentioned stay with their programs. What's the program for Alex and Border Ballers? We're going to find out.
Welcome back to Border Ballers, where we can get free announced and explain the metric system at the same time. You know who can always do both? Trey Tomlinson. After stopping receivers in their tracks in the FCS, the Winnipeg native comes over to the G5 and disrupts offenses in new ways, like leading all Sunbelt corners and QB pressures with 6 this season, including a sack and a QB hit at Mizzou. He's like a honey badger coming off the edge. On the East Coast, Etobicoke's own Brendan Barrow continues his breakout grad year at Rhode Island, trucking and weaving through front sevens with an average of 4.5 yards after contact and collecting a pair of multi-touchdown games to get the Rams to the FCS playoffs. Baron Miles Jr. started his season with a red zone touchdown and finished it with another in Saturday's Bayou Classic, showing off that sticky hand, zero-drop reliability he's had at Grambling State this year ahead of an important CFL draft for the senior from Montreal. That's it for Border Ballers. I'll see you on Saturday.
Thank you, Alex. Gord, who is your NC2A Canadian of the Week?
No brainer, it's Antoine Raymond. And while and this has been a common refrain this season, Rutgers fell a little short, ultimately ending their season at 5-7, not being able to win that 6th to make a bowl. Raymond was all over the field for them, the clear leader of that Rutgers offense for most of this season, and a guy that kind of came out of nowhere for them. And this is a team that does have some talent. Ian Strong's a legitimate wide receiver prospect for the NFL this year, for example. But Raymond was clearly their guy. 161 yards rushing and a touchdown. Added another, I think it was 20-something receiving yards and a touchdown as a receiver as well. He's shown versatility. He's shown hard running. He's shown ball security skills. He's been really, really good. And the best news, Jim, he's only a sophomore. So we've got at least one more year to watch him at this level to continue to blossom.
And the other thing, he knows how to find the end zone as well. When we come back, we'll talk about U Sports. It was an eventful week. High school football coaches nominate your players for the NFL Canada Way to Play Awards. Each week, winners earn a $3,000 equipment grant for their school program. Show us game footage that highlights safe, proper technique, and impactful play. Winners announced weekly on NFL Live and on NFL Canada's social channels. Learn more at nfl.com/CA Way to Play. Welcome back, everyone. Well, an eventful week in U Sports. The Vanier Cup, the trophy, the actual trophy is under assault. SFU is trying to get back into U Sports after being in the NCAA for the better part of a decade plus. And Bishops was cast out of the AUS because teams in that conference really couldn't absorb it in their budgets. Gord, which one of these things do you want to tackle first?
Oh, why don't we get into them in the order you mentioned them and start talking about the trophy controversy? And I got to be honest, Jim, I kind of like it. And I'm not saying that I like the trophy being damaged or defaced, but for those not familiar, essentially Laval at some point in the last year while they had the trophy wrote a pro Laval acronym on the bottom of the trophy. And then also removed all the Montreal Championship plaques. This is like old school rivalry hatred stuff, and I kind of like that. And I mean, it's not that big of a defacing of the trophy. Like, they haven't actually like permanently damaged the trophy really and stuff like that. Should they be doing it? Absolutely not. But I kind of like it, and I think that it just adds another level of depth to what's probably the best rivalry in the country right now, those two schools. So I'm sure I'll be interested to see if Montreal has the gumption to offer some sort of a counterpunch while they have the trophy for the next little while. But I mean, this isn't unprecedented. There's all sorts of legendary stories about the Grey Cup getting damaged, broken, and all sorts of crazy stuff being done with it. Same with the Stanley Cup. Any of these trophies that are out of the league's possession for a full year and get passed around and reused are subject to some of these things from time to time. And like I said, I'm kind of a sucker for the old fashioned hate between the two of them, and I kind of like that.
What about Simon Fraser asking to get back into Canada West and eventually U Sports again? I think for those who want football to return, they're going to be waiting a little bit longer than for the return of SFU in 2027 for their other varsity sports.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's little doubt that there's at least a slight sliver of hope by virtue of returning to U Sports that didn't exist when they were still in the NCAA. That program was never going to come back as an NCAA program. Never. And in U Sports, I think that it probably doesn't come back, and maybe not anytime soon. But I do think that there's, like, if it was going to come back, it was going to have to come back as a U Sports program. And so the fact that the rest of the athletic department has made what frankly is the common sense choice to move back to U Sports, I think is a good thing. Now, I will point out, because I don't think this should be left unsaid, the fact that SFU is also cutting some of its more successful sports as a part of this move is terrible. And it's yet another misstep from an athletic department that has been off in the wilderness doing Lord knows what on one of those Aaron Rodgers vision quests or something like that for the last decade. And I have no idea what their plan is. They are ultimately citing rising costs and stuff like that too. And I get that as a justification for the U Sports move, but taking opportunities away from athletes, never a great call. And I'm looking at not just SFU, but also that university in Montreal that decided to axe a bunch of its athletic programs this past week too.
Bishops joining the RSEQ again next year. They were bounced out by their AUS teammates after a number of years being a competitive team in the AUS. I think this is a giant step backwards for U Sports football. What do you think?
I think that it's a step backwards for the AUS for sure. And I guess I'm going to be the curmudgeon on this week's program, but like, this is, Jim, I'm going to be blunt. This is embarrassing for the AUS. The schools that are in the AUS remain in the AUS decided that they couldn't absorb one trip to Quebec a season in their budget. Like all of a sudden you have to get on a plane, and oh my God, how are we ever going to afford that? Like that is some real minor league stuff. And I was talking to a friend of mine who ran afoul of an AOS supporter online by referring to the league as kind of a second tier league, and it's like, my answer to him was like, well, the schools themselves tell you that it's a second tier league by the way that they treat everybody else and the way that they fund and treat their programs. Like, they act like it's recreational half the time, and it's really a shame and a disservice to the game. For U Sports on the whole, I don't know, Jim, that this is necessarily a bad thing. It brings the RSEQ back up to an even 6 teams. It adds another team that's competitive in the bottom half of that conference with those other groups. So there's more competitive games, I think, in the RSEQ schedule. And frankly, like, if the AUS wants to continue setting itself behind, then they continue setting themselves behind. But I think the RSEQ actually does gain a little bit from this, and it feels more natural, in my opinion, to have Bishops back in the conference with the rest of the Quebec schools, including their crosstown institution, Sherbrooke.
Speaking of running afoul of supporters, let's go to our mailbag. On our YouTube account, we had a comment about us criticizing the Vanier Cup last week. And it suggested that we shouldn't report on the NCAA or Canadians in the NCAA before the Vanier Cup. There's a quote here, and I think it's from you, Gord, where it says, I also have a feel of a mid-October conference game. And he says, well, that's exactly the impression that you gave me. And he's insisting that the Vanier Cup is an exceptional event. You know, one of the reasons we talk about the Vanier Cup in detail as an event is because, A, we care about it, And B, I've got some background in actually running one of these things, and maybe the most successful one of all time. And that's what we're talking about in terms of putting the work in and being a champion of, to sell out a lower bowl in BC Place Stadium prior to the Grey Cup in a week, by the way, that people didn't know much about U Sports football. If you put the effort in, you get the result. I haven't seen a result really over the last 10 years when it comes to the Vanier Cup, unless it's being staged in Laval.
Yeah, I mean, I take a little bit of umbrage to the suggestion that we don't pay the requisite amount of attention to the Vanier Cup in particular and U Sports in general on this program. I am out at every home game of my local U Sports team, whether as a spectator or this past fall actually working on the broadcasts. I played at that level. I played in a Vanier Cup. I talked to several other people across the country who also played this level and played in Vanier Cups. And we all had the exact same opinion on this, which is that this year's game was lifeless and was not up to the standard that should be held for not just a national championship, but the national championship in U Sports. And the last thing that I am going to do is treat the organization of the event with kid gloves and lower the bar to something that they can actually hit at this point in time that is below the standard that is befitting what the Vanier Cup should be. So for those saying that we're not cheerleaders enough for what remains of that product, I'm sorry that you feel that way. And I would really like to be more positive in the way that we present our coverage of this event. But at the end of the day, I am going to hold the organization and the organizers to a standard of what this event should be. And it should not be that people who have a vested interest in watching the Vanier Cup turned it off partway through the game because they're like, this is dull. And in the Canadian football mecca, that there are flies in the stands watching this game when its home province's flagship university is in the game looking for their first national championship in a handful of years. That is never going to be acceptable to me. And I am never going to sit here and say, well, that was a pretty good game. Like there were some really good plays and I enjoyed it. And let's stretch to find the positives in that, because I just fundamentally don't believe in that, Jim. So I don't know what people want in general from this organization or what they think is to gain from just sitting there being like, oh, yeah, everything's going great. Vanier Cup, big time game, big deal event. Because at the end of the day, the people who were there running it did not treat it like a big time event. So why should we?
Bottom line, we know it can be better. When we come back, we'll talk to Blake Nill, the head coach of the UBC Thunderbirds, and his thoughts about the future of college football in Canada. Stick around. There it is, our CFC 50, the top 10 high school programs in the country for this week. By the way, if you're a high school football player born in 2009 to 2011, head on over to CanadaFootballChat.com to register now for the CFC Evaluation Camp Tour. Stop in one of 9 locations across Canada for your chance to play in the 2026 CFC Prospect Game on TSN. And welcome back, everyone. Joining me is Blake Nill, the head coach of the UBC Thunderbirds. I think you're also director of football operations there as well. I think they've given you a number of titles over the years. It just means you do more work. Thanks for joining us. Way to get the brand out there. That's also a positive. That's thinking. Hey, we're trying to be solutions focused on this show, and I think for a program out there that has had peaks and valleys in terms of student engagement and fan engagement, you may have found a solution this year at UBC. I've spent a lifetime connected to that program in one way or another, and I can't remember a year where UBC football has been better attended than this past year. What was the secret to all that?
Straight up, Jim, we invested money into the student experience, invested money into engaging with students during the game week and organizing them to be on campus or be at the stadium at the game day. I thought it was a great effort, not only from our department, but from several boosters who helped fund the initiative. And It's what we got to do. We have at UBC specifically, we're an on-campus brand. We need to get our on-campus population to those games.
Yeah, when we take a look around the country and we see what's happening at McGill right now, football didn't get cut, but 25 sports are getting cut. We both experienced here in the Lower Mainland what happened with Simon Fraser, and there continues to be cuts there. It's usually not one reason, but whether it's a positive or a negative, it comes down to about 2 or 3 people that kind of make those decisions and drive those decisions. Frame for me what happens in a situation when those 2 or 3 people are champions of sport rather than trying to manage balance sheets or politics.
Well, that's the truth, Jim. Whenever a situation occurs where there's funding issues, it's typically the emotional value that 1 or 2 or 3, a handful of individuals have towards that sport that makes a difference. They're the individuals who will champion it or will go to bats for the program, not only with their own finances, but also with their networks. And it's those impact individuals that every sport, no matter whether it's U Sports in Canada or the NCAA in America, has. And it's got to be a priority for athletic departments and head coaches to not only go out and recruit individuals like that, but make sure that they're engaged in the program from day one forward.
Now, Blake, I want to get into philanthropy and those people in your alumni who step up. To put a fine point on it, how do you engage them and what motivates them to continue on in terms of supporting a program?
Jim, my approach may be, different than a lot of younger coaches are coaches who don't have the experience that I would have. But I cut right to the quick of the issue. I explain to my boosters that that they're responsible for the growth of the program. I know how to coach, I know how to recruit, I know how to manage athletes, call plays, whatever. It's the money, the financing that is required that separates is a requirement and needed to separate you from a 500 program to a top 10 program or a top 10 program to a perennial contender. And that's my approach to alumni. How much value did the program create during your tenure as an athlete? How important does that remain in your life and in your emotional capacity? And we have to we need to reflect the value that experience provided you back to the current program.
I've got a feeling that coaches that are more senior coaches like yourself are just putting that story together right now, and it's a story that needs to be told about the importance of football and varsity sports, quite frankly, within the campus community and to the broader community. I don't think we've done a good job necessarily collectively of doing that. Is this something that you're trying to influence younger coaches to take on? Is this something that is a collective discussion when you get together at Kafka with 26 other coaches? Is this something that is on the horizon where football's got to start making its case within university communities?
Jim, when I'm with younger coaches, what I talk about mostly is sustainability of our sport. Okay, there's no question football has a big bullseye on its back for a number of reasons. Okay, and as we were talking earlier, probably worldwide, not just in Canada or in the United States. However, sustainability involves priority spending. It involves strategic management of costs, but it also involves attracting those individuals where football made a difference in their lives. And having coached as long as I have, I speak to young men. They're not young men anymore. They're 50 years old. Individuals who I coached at St. FX or St. Mary's, and the value of that experience, they're ready to give back, right? They still have this bond associated with a few football seasons that is just like an innate, it's an innate feeling that creates incredible importance. That importance has to be reciprocated into the current program.
When it comes to, you're talking about young men and essentially building leadership in those individuals through varsity sport. And I look at Canadian campuses, and let's stick on McGill and SFU that have been the most afflicted by cuts to their athletic programs. There is a case being made quite quietly about cutting the SFU football program that it was actually also a move to gender equity. And there was discussion around McGill, which was why not cut football because it would be a stride towards gender equity. But when you look at campuses now, like McGill, 39% of registrants are male. When you look at Simon Fraser, 44% of registrants are male. Does varsity sport create a magnet for more young men to pursue a university degree and be involved in that culture that allows them to grow as leaders and associate with peers as they go through their learning phase at that particular time of their lives?
100%, I'm in full agreement with that. We going as you know, through the decades, you're seeing, in my world, you're seeing more young men who come from single parent families, from mostly mothers. You're seeing young men who just don't have opportunities because of a dysfunctional home environment, or just maybe a more difficult home environment. What varsity sport does is it teaches old-fashioned values that my father would have taught me, like work ethic, being resilient. So it creates mental toughness. It creates accountability. Football and varsity sport, i- there, I I argue till I'm blue in the face, is one of the best teaching tools for both males and females that we still have in our society. And to advocate for it in myself takes no, I'll advocate for it. It's no effort at all. It's common sense. What the characteristics required to be a successful student athlete, what characteristics you need and what it means in our society. They both equivalent to very successful and outstanding opportunities.
Now, you were talking earlier about younger coaches and actually operating in a space as an older coach where you see the bigger picture. Now, I think a lot of people got to know you as a coach through St. Mary's, either up close or from a distance. I got to know you when you were in Calgary at the University of Calgary, when you put a dominant program together there for a number of years. And then you moved out here to UBC. You've gone through a lot of changes as a coach in terms of what your approach is, what your focus was between the lines to a bigger picture. Maybe you can, just for the benefit of those who are out there coaching or leading in football in one place or another, in amateur football in this country and elsewhere. Can you tell me how important those changes were and what those changes, did to your outlook?
Yeah, absolutely. When I left X, we were number one in the country the entire year in 1997. Lost in the playoffs, but through the regular season. St. Mary's, we were at or near the top. Calgary, we were at or near the top. And here at UBC, we're always fighting to be in contention. What it would have been easy to it would have been easy to stay at any of those past programs and have a very successful, sustainable career, and probably a lot easier on me personally. But there's challenges associated. I'm a believer that you need new challenge in life. You have to stay motivated and you can't become complacent. And like it's worked for me in that way. That's what I try to build my programs around, is competitive culture where every day you got to come and strive to be your best. And it's needed in our society. It's needed in the workforce. It's needed in business. It's needed in education. And it's certainly needed in the development of young people, and thus the value of varsity sport.
What's the division as a leader of a program that you divide between projecting values within your organization, projecting competition, and applying, not X's and O's strategy, but strategy overall to how you go forward, how you grow that support base, and how you engage people on campus? Because all three of those pillars are important.
Yeah, first of all, it's reminding people in decision making levels, at the decision making levels, about the value of fundamental characteristics, fundamental character traits, a competitive, competing, wanting to be better, holding yourself accountable to the highest tasks, being accountable to others, time management, all those things. So again, when I approach, whether it's a university president, I spoke to many presidents over the course of my career. I emphasize the value of varsity sport in that regard. When I talk to boosters, many boosters, I believe, I'm just, I don't have stats behind me, but I believe most schools have the research that shows varsity alumni contribute more than non-varsity alumni back to the school. That's because they recognized the difference they made, that particular tenure of their life made in their future successes. That's because there was an emotional support towards the university, because you actually went out and bled and for the program. You actually went out and give everything you could to try to represent the brand of the school. And it's that value that I believe it falls on two people: the current coaches in the programs, the current members of the program, but also the alumni. The alumni have to push that, because many of our current directors don't have the experience that directors had 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it was uncommon not to have a varsity football, hockey, or basketball coach as your AD. And nowadays it's rare to have individuals in the lead or at the decision making level who have had a significant tenure in varsity athletics.
One of the studies that we received when we were working on defending the SFU program, and it wasn't from SFU, it was from another Canadian school, in terms of advancement, that uh, uh, former students who were athletes donated 60% more than the average student to a university. So the numbers are there, and I'm sure that going across the country, those numbers are fairly common. Lastly here, while I have you here, what is your thought on where football is in this country right now? I think in some ways there's some dynamic programs out there and some individuals making an impact, but have we stagnated a little bit over the last decade?
Honestly, we have. Okay. We need, again, you're speaking to someone who his life has been a focus because of football. And the importance I put into the game is just measurably larger than most people. But what we need to understand with the sport of football is, again, how it impacts lives, how it changes lives, how it creates leaders, the and also what it does once those leaders have been identified. There's always a larger give back, as you just said. It's not, it's not a coincidence that the arena on the UBC campus is named after a former football athlete, Doug Mitchell. You see those representations at St. Mary's, Bob Hayes, everywhere you see examples of excellence associated not only with football but with other varsity. The people closest to the game, myself, my colleagues in the head coaching ranks and the assistant coaches, but most importantly, those individuals who played varsity football need to get involved and need to become an advocate for the benefit of the game. The game has changed where it's not what it used to be 20 years ago. It's safer. It's less. The issues associated with it are minimal compared to what it was like 20 years ago. It does create value, but those in the position of authority and those in the position of past experience have to be the ones that championship its brand. And if that's, we'll be okay if we can rally the masses. But if we're not able to, if everyone falls silent, football is going to become more and more stagnant and less important on our university campuses, and maybe even our society as a whole.
Well, we're here to make sure that doesn't happen. Blake, thanks very much for this. Appreciate your time.
Appreciate it, Jim. Thank you very much.
Coming up next, our games of the week. Okay, Gord, game of the week, and it's a title game.
That's right. Yeah, the Mountain West Logjam was determined, Jim, and it was determined by computers. And fortunately for Ty Benefield and his Boise State Broncos, they came out on the plus end of the computer math. Hawaii and New Mexico left on the outside looking in. They'll be playing UNLV in the Mountain West title game. This one goes Friday night. Boise about a 3.5-point favorite in this one, and they just barely squeaked out a win in their last game against Utah State, but they have bounced back nicely after a couple of hiccups when starting quarterback Max Madsen went down in about week 10. So they're kind of righting the ship here, and for this program, with 4 losses on the record, the college football playoff is definitely out the window at this point, but winning the Mountain West Conference has kind of been the bare minimum bar for a successful season at this program. So they're going to be gunning to continue that streak going, and Ty Benefield leading the charge on the defensive side.
Thanks for that, Gord. Next week, Darren DuPont will be hosting. I'll be in Switzerland trying out fondue. I'll give you a report on that. But for now, this is Jim Mullin saying, let's get out to the game.